with Keller Williams. I know they have great training. But when I started with Charles Rutenberg, they did not have training. And I basically got to the board of realtors with every class I could. And then I'm a pretty good student. So I was always like looking at mom's old files. What did she fill in? What did that mean? And asking a bunch of questions. So, but I know what it feels like to be trying to figure things out. And I don't want y'all ever panicking. So just by being in this class, you're already way ahead of where I was. If this is your, oh, Carrie says more than I know. Text me her email. Oh, you will. Oh, you're such a good. Okay, hold on a second. I got an assistant here. See, ask and you'll receive. So her email, Carrie, is Karen, Karen, Serenity, SERENITY @yahoo.com. So thank you for that help. You're awesome. So anyway, I just say that to let you know that, oh, awesome, that this is great. And then of course, COVID hit. I wasn't doing any kind of training. I wasn't even a broker then. I've been a broker about a year. I was answering questions for agents at the brokerage, trying to just help out after COVID. And then I was like, go get your broker's license because you're answering the questions. You can do this. So here I sit. So before we get started on the as-is contract, which is really important for you as an agent, whether you're on the buyer side or the seller side, because you're either going to be writing that offer or you're going to be receiving that offer. And you have to know what is in that contract, how it's written, because whatever is in writing is enforceable. So many times when the agents will call in asking questions about a transaction and the contract, they'd say, I'd say, well, what does your contract say? And they wouldn't know. And I've been in the situation where I didn't know. And so I looked and I was like, oh, that's what it says. So that's what's going to be enforceable. So, in your spare time, go read over the standards of the contract and get those down. And I mean, we're not attorneys, but, and you can't interpret it for your customers, but it's good for you if you know what's in this contract and what it means and what it will indicate. If anything ever gets questioned or goes to lawsuit. And as I've said before, I don't ever want to scare anybody about not practicing real estate, but it's just like driving a car. Most of us drive around, never have an accident, or you might have a little fender bender, but we're all living and breathing still. So far, none of us have had a fatal car accident. You could, but we still go out and drive. Same thing with real estate. You are just taking people on a journey, and you have to be good at navigating the circumstances for your buyers or your sellers. And if you're unsafe, you could have some serious consequences that you won't die. You won't have a physical injury. Let's hope you don't. But you could have financial injury. And one of my brokers that I loved, he said, well, if you don't go to class and pay your tuition, you may learn that from the real life school and just pay that way. So, so far I haven't had to pay for anything. I've come close because I've done things either out of ignorance, never really intentionally, but just didn't think about it or didn't realize what was going on as I learned. So what I'm going to try to do, and I do this in April, it's called Practical Real Estate and Case Studies. So I kind of share some of the escapades I've had, and then also some of the ones that I've helped other agents get out of and manage. That's a good class. What I'm going to do before I get into that today is I want to talk with you about some writers. I probably could have a whole class just on writers, but tomorrow we're holding a class in person only at the brokerage at 10 in the morning. And the first 30 minutes, so 10 to 10:30, I'm going to be discussing the new revisions to the condo rider that are in effect because of the tragedy over on the East Coast, over Surfside, where the building collapsed because of deferred maintenance. So it's kind of a funny story. I was at my open house in Nokomis over Sunday, and I had buttoned everything up. It was past the open house time. For some reason, I sat in the seller's driveway an extra 10 minutes going through my phone before I made the long drive home to Tampa Bay. And out of the corner of my eyes, two guys came in and I'm like, are you here for the open house? Yeah, it's later, but the realtor didn't have a card. I'm kind of like a little off balance. So let me check and see if the seller still wants to show. She did. So he went ahead and used his e-key, to have it. So I was like, okay. So he tells me his name is James Buchanan. I'm like, that's kind of an interesting name for somebody. And okay, so they're looking at the house, and the house is like, it's like listed at $11.99, $1,199,000. So it's a nice home. They're looking around, and something got said, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm the training broker at Charles Rettenberg. And I said, as a matter of fact, I'm having a class on Friday, which is this class I'm telling you about the condo revisions. And I said, because I just can't help myself to teach sometimes, the key Cliff Notes coaching words are milestone, inspection report, and CRRs. And James Buchanan, the realtor, looked at me and he goes, yeah, he goes, I'm really glad you're teaching that. I helped write that legislation. I'm your Florida representative. I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. And I kind of halfway believed him, but sure enough, after the open house, I went and looked him up, and it was the Florida House rep, James Buchanan. So he was the realtor at the open house. Now, that's neither here nor there, but it just goes to show you never know who you're going to be running into or talking with, and kind of joke on me that I'm trying to get him up to speed on stuff he wrote. Okay. But the reason I'm sharing that with you, maybe you'll remember these two things a little better, because they will affect you. I'm going to be sharing tomorrow. Oh, there's Carrie. Thanks for getting her in, Carrie. I'm going to be sharing with you tomorrow at this 10 o'clock class to 10:30 what those condo revisions are, what they mean, what kind of condos they apply to. I also have a presentation from the Florida Realtors webinar that I'm going to be sharing. So if you're interested in that, you can text me, and I got my number there in the chat. If you would like the webinar presentation on the slides and the new riders, they actually have the new condo rider. There's Liliana Moore uploaded to the dashboard, so you won't have to go hunt and pecking that through Transaction Desk or Form Simplicity. But anyway, I invited Liliana to come in as we're kind of doing our introduction. So, hey, Liliana, nice to see you this evening. Tell everybody who you are and why you're here.
Oh, first of all, to see you. So I'm Liliana Ward. I'm the owner of Showhomes Tampa, and we are the best realtor friends. So we help realtors to sell more listings. It's a one-stop shop. We fully prepare the listings for sale, anything from landscaping to painting, repairs, flooring, and staging. So how the friends telling me, leave the drama to Liliana because it's so much.
Oh, I love that tagline. Leave the drama to Liliana. I love it.
You guys, you have to run and make money, sell these listings, not waiting for the cleaning lady and call the handyman and fight with them because they didn't replace well the door handle. So let me deal with them because I know how I speak their language, if you can figure that out.
That's awesome, Liliana. So thanks for that. So tell everybody your telephone number or put it in the chat or both.
Yes, it's 813-753-7436.
Okay, and then throw it in the chat.
Yeah.
So if you need to prepare any of your listings professionally, Liliana will come out at no charge and work up a program for your sellers for different levels of service based on the kind of return. Is that right, Liliana?
Yes, I would say the secret is to sell me as part of your team. Don't tell them that you bring somebody from another company. Make me part of your services so you have a leg up compared with the competition. So let's say a seller has an interview with 3 agents, and you're coming and say, choose me because I have a team that can come and professionally prepare your home for sale, can potentially defer the payment at closing, you get more money, and in 10 days or less, my team will prepare the house for sale. So how would you look in front of that seller? And somebody else is coming and walk the house and show them what is bad things in the house. You have to paint here, you have to do this. So just imagine from the seller's point of view, one of the realtor tells them what to do, and another realtor said, don't worry, my team is coming. In 10 days, we prepare everything, and you can even pay at closing. So it's something that gets you a competitive advantage.
That's awesome. Now, Liliana is also a great instructor, and she is going to be teaching a class in the Charles Rutenberg office. I just heard my voice echo. I don't know what was that. It's still doing it. Did anybody change any of their settings?
It's still doing it.
No, I don't know what the deal is. I didn't do anything different. Okay, I don't hear it now. So anyway, her class is April the 11th, I believe. Is that right, Liliana? Can you hear me, Liliana? Yes, okay. I think it's April 11th, and it's on, 5:30 p.m. So what's really nice, hey, Gary, what's really nice is she offers 3 CEU credits when you take that class as well. And and a light dinner, right? So come a little hungry, and we'll have a good time. So I think you'll really enjoy it. I took her class at Pro. That's how we met. I was the only in-person student, so I got all her attention. Lucky me. But she's a really good teacher, and she really gave me some really good insights dealing with sellers and listings. It's not on Zoom, Carrie. You're going to have to come, because I got to tell you, it's really hard for an instructor with the lack of technology we have in that classroom to teach a hybrid class.
She did. You know what? It's a design class, and it's a lot of interaction. So we will be able, after the class, we have like a nice game. We go on MLS. We choose homes that they are on the market for more than 100 days. And after the class, you will be able to spot why they are not selling it. And you say, okay, I will do this, I will do this, I will do this. And you will become like, I know how to teach you. There's few tricks. Is not a big deal, believe me. I don't want to pump myself up. You can learn after 3 hours how to prepare yourself a listing for sale.
Yeah. So I just wanted to introduce Liliana. She's just been a real asset to my team. And that way I always share the good things with you guys that I come into being. So that's why she's here tonight, and she will be there on the 11th. And I think, aren't you even coming tomorrow morning, Liliana?
I absolutely will.
Yeah, Karen's clapping. So yeah, so we'll get a little.
And if you have any questions, pictures, you want help, just bring it over. I will help you. Say, listen, what I'm doing with this, even if it's your house, don't worry.
Yeah, she'll give you listing advice and staging, property preparation advice. She doesn't like the S word. All right,
okay.
Liliana.
Okay,
thank you for stopping. Okay, God bless you. See you in the morning.
See you tomorrow.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so what I wanted to share with you before Liliana popped in, I was talking about that condo writer revision and how I met the guy that helped her write it on Sunday. Well, I actually have pulled off the writers for you, and there are 3 of them that have been affected. And I'm really going to speak to 2 of them right now, because one's dealing with a co-op. I don't know. I've never sold a co-op property before, so we can talk about that separately. But I have sold properties that are condominiums, and I wanted to kind of bring out a little bit of difference on the writers. You may or may not be familiar with this, but there are 2 different types of sales contracts that are available for us to use when you sell residential property. One is the one we're going to address tonight, the as-is contract for sale and purchase. But there's also another one that is the, it's called the CRISP the residential sales. Let me see. I'm going to go over to, I had it over here. Let me go. You'll see me, but I won't see you for 1 second. It's called the contract for residential and sale purchase. So you either have the as is or you have the contract for residential sale purchase. If you put contract residential sale and purchase, CRSP, you get the acronym CRISP. So it's not, oh crap. Did I lose you? I did, didn't I? Karen, did I go away? No? Did you hear me say the word when I thought I had lost you?
I heard you say crisp. The crispy one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Crisp. Okay, that's what I said. That's totally what I said. Okay. Okay. I didn't mean to say that, but yeah, I thought I'd lost you for a minute. So, okay, you're going to remember that because it's crisp, right? Okay. So the contract for residential sale and purchase is the crisp contract, and the other one is the as is. Well, there's some differences. I mean, the crisp one's only 9 pages. The as is that we usually use is like 12. But the main thing is the crisp contract calls for repairs by the seller to a certain amount. And you'll see on, like, I think it's about page 2 of it, that there's a default of a certain percentage unless you change it. So it kind of puts some repairs back on the seller. So if I'm a seller and I'm receiving the same offer from 2 different buyers, one's on the as is and one's on the crisp offer, and all the terms are the same, except now I'm going to be obligated for seller repairs on the crisp, I'm going to take the as is, right? It's more competitive. So that's why you see more cooperating agents, buyer's agents, writing offers on the as is, because the sellers don't want to have to deal with repairs. Okay, so it makes it more competitive. So that's what I wanted to establish first. Now, the second thing I want to establish is with the as is contract, there are writers that go with that contract for the as is contract. With the CRISP contract, there are writers that are the same name, but they go with the CRISP contract. And you have to watch it because the condo writers will reference lines in the contract, but the lines are different. So you can't interchange the wrong writer with the wrong contract. I don't know if I'm saying this clearly enough, but if you have an as-is contract, you need to make sure the writers that you are using are as-is writers. If you're using a CRISP contract for some reason, you need to make sure you're using the CRISP writers. And the way you can tell that, and it made me think I really haven't emphasized this in this as-is class before, but with these condo revisions, for the condo writer, there's one for the as-is and there's one for the CRISP. And at the bottom of the CRISP addendums, they will actually say CRSP-16F. Okay, so it'll say CRISP on the bottom. So if you've got an as-is contract and you see that the listing agent has uploaded an addendum that goes to you've got an as-is you're writing, and they've uploaded a CRISP. If it's one that doesn't have any line references to the contract, you're okay. I think FERPTA, the foreign seller condo writer, is okay. It doesn't have any line references. But if it's like the condo writer, you might want to call up the listing agent and say, listen, I'm actually going to submit an as-is offer, so I'm going to need the as-is condo writer, and you might want to prepare that, but the seller will end up having to sign that because you want them to all match up. Because if it starts referencing a line in the CRISP contract and you're using an as-is contract, it's not going to line up. Does that make sense? Or is it more confusing? Nobody's saying anything, so I don't know.
So you're saying like if you're representing the seller and then the buyer comes in with a crisp contract, then they better have only the crisp addendums, and otherwise you tell them about that.
Yeah, what I've seen in the office when I was helping with document compliance, I would get an as-is contract in, okay, but then the agent would upload, let's say, the crisp condo addendum or some other crisp addendum that referenced the crisp contract, but yet we had an as-is contract in the file.
So make sure that every time that you write a contract and you look at if you look at any additional addendum papers or any condo things, that it has the same author at the bottom, either
Yeah, if it's the as-is, it'll say CR. It'll say CR. If it's the crisp one, it'll say CRSP.
Okay.
So really, you're okay. If you don't see crisp, it's not crisp. But if you see crisp on a writer, and like I believe FERPTA, they don't have an as-is one. So, but the FERPTA doesn't reference the lines. You know what I'm saying? Someone says
So
perfect
everything
sense.
has to be matchy. That's all, right?
Matchy. Yeah, because if you go to court and they're like, this line 13 that's referenced in the CRIS contract, says yada, 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 and you don't have a CRIS contract, well, what are you going to do then? You got to be able to put, the pressure to the paper as to what's going to be enforceable. So if it's all confusing, it's got to match. Okay, so I know when I came in for file compliance, I didn't even know what a crisp was. I had always just used the as is. And when the broker was explaining to me, at first it was like, well, just make sure that the writers match the contract, but I didn't know why. And now I know why. It's the lines, okay? And I didn't know what the difference was in the contract. So what I tried to do is pack all that in a nutshell so you guys would get all of it at once. That make sense? Okay. So it reminded me, because in the condo revisions for the class we're going to have tomorrow, that's going to talk about this milestone inspection report and the CRRs, and I'll go into that tomorrow. It's not scary. It's just like the next step to protect the buyers of condos. But it's just like, it's just new information, but it's not hard. But I'll go into what that is. But both of the condo writers, the CRIS and the as-is writers for condos, are affected. So I'll have both of them to show you. Okay. I hope that works. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to make it any more confusing. So had time to make ramen noodles. Do not get hungry. All right, Gary, good job. Good job. Okay. As-is contract has FERPTA in it. No writer just dealt with it. Carrie. Okay, well, that's good. It does have a FERPTA in it. I have had a foreign seller before, and I actually had to use the FERPTA addendum. So, but maybe that was overkill. Maybe you know more than I do on that one. I haven't. I know it does have some language about FERPTA, but I've always been told to use the FERPTA addendum. But I'm not a FERPTA expert. I know they have a class at Pro on it, just to address foreign sellers. I just know that if you don't want your foreign seller to have to hold back 15% of the purchase price for 2 years, you're going to have to get a buyer that's willing to sign an affidavit that is an intent to reside. And from my understanding, they have to reside in the property for at least 6 months out of the year. It has nothing to do with homestead, but it's just an intent to reside. It's an affidavit. The title company can help you out with that. Okay, so with that being said about Liliana's class, the early morning class tomorrow, and also after the condo writer talk, which is only going to be 30 minutes because I'm not going to go through the whole condo revision presentation. I'll have that to email to you all if that's what you want. I'll just go over the highlights of it. But then at 10:30 to noon, we're going to watch the Florida Realtor webinar, which will talk about the most frequently asked questions for the as-is contract that were directed to the Florida Legal Hotline. So that'll be kind of a good recap after we go over the basics tonight. So now you're going to get familiar with the document. Tomorrow you'll hear about other people's questions. And I had actually watched the last webinar by myself, and I thought, oh, this is great information. Why don't we get some agents together in the office and watch it together, and then we can chit chat and also network and all that kind of thing. Maybe learn from one another. Okay. Any questions before I bring up the as-is contract? Okay. Let's see. And I've got everybody here written down. Let's see. 6 of us. Yeah, got it. Okay. So I hope you all have an as-is contract in front of you. I don't like to screen share because the ones that, like Karen keeps herself, and I like to see reactions. And I guess I'm old school. I used to just look at the paper instead of looking at the screen. But get your as-is contract out and let's look at it on page, the first one of 12. On the very first line, you're going to see an asterisk, and always in the as-is or in any of these agreements, when you see an asterisk, that's typically where you're going to have to fill something out, and it needs to be addressed accurately. So you want to pay attention to it. That story I was telling you about my mom, the very first offer I wrote, I didn't have any guidance, and I grabbed one of her old contracts and said, what did she fill out? I had no clue. So you're already way ahead. But when you go to line 1, you're going to see the name of the seller. Okay, so you can do a couple of different things to decide what that seller's name is. The first thing I typically do, because I like to go to the source of the information, I will go to the property appraiser's website. So every county has one. I've sold a lot in Pinellas County, so I'm always visiting the Pinellas County Property Appraiser's website. It needs to end, the website needs to end in .gov or something like that, because there are entities out there that try to make themselves look official, and then they charge you for that information. There's no charge to it. So if you get on a website and they're wanting you to subscribe to something, you're on the wrong one. So get on the Pinellas County Property Appraiser's website, or Hillsborough County has a different one. Pasco has one. Manatee has one. Sarasota has one. They all look different, but they all have the same information. They'll have the information about the property by the address. They'll have it by the seller. They will have it, they'll have a legal description. They'll have the tax ID number. They'll have all the sales recorded. They'll have permits there. They have all kinds of information. So I like to go there whenever I'm going to either be listing a property or putting an offer on a property, and look that document over and see if I see anything that's irregular. You can kind of tell there sometimes if, you've got an extra room and there's no permitting, on the tax record. It's like, well, there might be unpermitted work on there, even though the seller didn't disclose it. You might see where they put in a new air conditioner or a new roof and it was permitted. So it's a good piece of information to be aware of. You can also go on the MLS and you can find out information, because the MLS has a feed directly from the tax record as well, from what I understand, but I just don't use it that way. So when I'm determining the seller's name, I'm looking at the tax record, and I also go and look at the attachments on the listing. And I mentioned this yesterday. A lot of times, at least in my case, because I have a lot of sales in a 55 plus community, the seller has passed. So he's gone and he's not living anymore. So sometimes it's still in his name and it's not in probate, and we can move forward, and his trustee will sign off for him. Other times they've had to do something legally in maybe probate, or maybe it wasn't even a probate, but they did, and they transferred the ownership to one of the heirs. And I've had it both ways, where they've said, no, keep it in the name of the deceased, or they've said, no, put it in the name of the heirs. So I always look at the attachments to the listing, because I figure that listing agent has probably already talked to title company and has probably had a discussion as to who truly is the seller. And I'm also making sure with the tax record that it looks like whoever is selling it has the authority to sell. There was one seller who wanted to sign something, and it was in a company's name, and he wasn't the trustee. And as I pressed him on it, he was like, it didn't make any sense, and he went away. I think he was doing something that he shouldn't have been doing. And you don't want to have a customer like that. So you always want to make sure that you know who the seller is, and then put their name there. So that's usually off tax record, and that's not too hard. The buyer, I've asked this, okay, when I've asked them what their terms are going to be in this offer, I've said, listen, the name I put down on the offer, if it's accepted, will go to contract. If it goes to contract and closes, it will go on the deed. So how would you like your name on the deed? Do you use a middle name? Do you use a middle initial? If your name is Bob, is it really Robert? Just those kind of things. So you got the seller and the buyer's name, and that should be fine. But just know that if you don't get it right, you'll be writing an addendum. And the idea is to try to have as little paperwork as possible, so you're not wasting your time and money and energy. Okay. On line 7, you see another asterisk, and that's going to be the street address, the city, and the zip, which you can also get off the tax record. Make sure, I missed this one time and got checked on it in compliance, located in which county? Is it in Pinellas, Hillsborough, Sarasota, Manatee? Put the county where the property is located in that blank. Okay, it's easy to miss. And then you've got the property tax ID, and you're going to find that in the tax record as well. Then you're going to, on C, you're going to have a legal description. Now, the legal description typically is short enough that you can put in that line. Sometimes it's longer that it won't fit in that line. And in that line, you could put, please see additional terms. And at the back end, I think it's page 11 of this contract. Let me just go there. It's actually page 12. On page 12 at the top, it has additional terms. So you could fill in a long legal description there. Now, some legal descriptions take a full page, and it won't even fit in additional terms. So you can say, see Exhibit A, and then you can put a long legal description on a different piece of paper, labeled that, and you'll be fine. If a survey is needed, this would be the time to check it out and see maybe if the seller has a survey that was taken recently, that it might save your buyer some money if they're using financing. Oh, never mind. People outside my window. If there's a survey available, you can always ask the listing agent, hey, does the seller have a survey that's available? And that would have legal description on it too. All right, so that takes care of like the property, like who's buying it, who's selling it, and what property is being described here. Any questions on that part? Okay, so then it moves into property, personal property versus real property. I've heard personal property and real property distinguished in a couple of different ways. One way somebody told me was personal property would be anything that you wouldn't need a tool to remove. But if you needed a tool, then it's going to be real property. Okay. Another way it's been described to me is turn the house upside down, and everything that shakes down to the roof as you've got it as the floor would be real property, and everything that stays is personal property. Everything that stays is real property. Okay. This can vary with cultures. Manuela Hendrickson I think she still is our president of PRO. I know she was last year. She still may be. She's a great woman. She taught an as-is contract. She comes from Germany. And apparently in Germany, they have a lot less, how can I put this, real property than they do personal property, because even their kitchen cabinets are considered personal property. So in Germany, there's like, when you go to buy and sell property, it's like just shells of structures. Like the kitchen cabinets are gone. The appliances are gone. Okay. So she said when she came over here, she had a German buyer, and he was saying to her, this house is for sale. The kitchen counters are still there. The appliances are still there. He didn't think that it was for sale. So his perspective was different. So if it can vary. And I say that because our area, Tampa Bay, as beautiful as it is kind of an international hub. So you may have different people from different cultures and with different expectations. So what the expectation here, and even when they're from New York or another state, I always tell them, this is not New York. This is Florida. We have our own way of doing things here. So in Florida, personal property is going to be distinguished by what you don't need a tool to remove, or what shakes down. Or if you look in these paragraphs, it's going to say that the personal property, the following items are owned and exist in the date or offer included. Let's say included in. So on D, you're going to see what's included that might be considered personal property, but they're saying no, that's going to be sold as part of the real property. So they revised this when they revised this in October of 2021 to include things like television mounting hardware, doorbells. They have these expensive rings now. So I guess people were putting things that you might consider to be personal property. They were moving them and it was damaging the real property. So like, no, we're going to change that and make it real property. So you can read that paragraph and see that these are the things that are going to convey with the real property. So that should be the seller's expectation of what's going to stay. However, in real estate, anything can be negotiated. So if you have a seller that has a chandelier that is like a family heirloom, even though it's considered a fixture, the letter E says the following items are excluded from the purchase. So maybe they do want to take the chandelier. Maybe they do want to take the window treatments. Maybe they do want to take the light fixture or drapery rods or something. The one thing I will tell you that's not included on this list that you might think would be included is the washer and dryer. Okay, so if you've got a buyer who is looking for that washer and dryer to be there on closing day, you best add the washer and dryer to line D. Okay. And the old contract before this only conveyed one refrigerator. So if there was like a garage refrigerator, you would have had to have included that. When they revised it, they added an S to the refrigerator. So that means every refrigerator. Anything that's written on this contract supersedes the listing agreement. So let's say the seller in the listing agreement says, everything conveys and puts in the washer and dryer conveys. But then you write up the offer and you forget to put in washer dryer and your buyer expects washer dryer. And then the seller goes, oh, in the contract, they don't have the washer dryer. So guess what? I'm going to sell those units to my Uncle Ed. And on closing day, your buyer comes in and his washer dryer isn't there. Guess who's going to be buying him a washer dryer out of your commission? Right? Okay. So don't forget to add the washer dryer in there if the buyer has the expectation of having it. I've never had this happen to me, but I've had some agents tell me that they've had some pretty crafty, creative sellers that they may have some really upgraded appliances, and then that's what they sell and go to contract with. And then on closing day, somehow they've replaced them with maybe a lesser grade of appliance. So if you see that happening, you may want to make sure that it, is included, the, 10 burner, commercial range stove, whatever it is that, whatever, just make sure it's clear, because whatever's in this contract, even though the seller may have said it conveyed in the listing agreement, and it might've been on the listing in MLS, if it's not in this contract, you won't have teeth to fight it for your customer. Okay. Let's see. And then of course, excluded from the purchase, that would be anything that, the seller wants to take. I've had some condo sales where the seller just wants to be able to walk away and take what they want and leave what they want. And in the seller's market, the buyer they were like, okay, we'll do whatever the sellers want. So I would say that all personal property conveys at seller's convenience with no contributory value. That means the seller can do whatever they want that's convenient to them. And especially if there's a mortgage loan on this, lenders don't want personal property to be included in a mortgage loan. So you have to say that it has no contributory value. Okay. So any questions on real property versus personal property and how to handle that? Okay. Okay, then we get to a real good one on 27. And when I helped with document compliance, I was surprised. Every once in a while, we'd get a contract in there that was supposedly fully executed without a contract price. So make sure the contract price is there. And we talked about this yesterday. Typically, the escrow money deposit is going to be about 1% of the purchase price. There are exceptions, but there should be on line 28, the escrow money deposit amount, which is also referred to as an EMD. And you're going to see in 30 that you can check the box to say that it's going to be made within a certain period, days, how many days. If it's left blank, it's 3 days. I went ahead and I start putting 3 days. If I'm writing the offer, instead of leaving it blank, I had one crafty agent that I think she left it blank. My seller signed it, countered. I don't know. It ended up weird where everybody had signed, but she switched the days to 2, like it was blank. So she put 2 in there. And I wanted to sell the property or wanted the buyer to get the offer, so I didn't fight it. But I guess I had the buyer because it put a hardship on getting the escrow money down in that time frame. So I always just, from that experience on, that was early on, I always just go ahead and fill in 3 days, even if it's there as a default. And then the escrow agent name, that's going to be typically, for sure, the company that's going to hold the escrow money deposit, but they typically end up being the title company or the title attorney that closes a transaction. Doesn't always have to work out that way, but it typically is. And I'll just put a little plug in for Integrity Title and Guarantee. They're Charles Ruttenberg Realty's affiliate title partner. And they have a bunch of events and meetups in April. Go on the class calendar and look at those. Those are going to be some good meetups. And they have like social drink tickets, some hors d'oeuvres and things like that. So if you can make those things, I think you'll enjoy meeting Byron and Tina and Michael Heath. He's the attorney that gives advice and also teaches really, really good classes. So you can put, if you're in Pinellas County, you're going to look on the listing, and typically you're going to see that the seller has a title company already picked out, which tells you they've already conceded that the seller is going to pick and pay the owner's title policy. And we'll get to that in a minute on this contract. If they don't have anything, because you're trying to save your buyer money, you'd probably be making a call to the agent saying, oh, by the way, I didn't see a title company listed on your listing and I'm writing an offer. Who are you using? And then they'll give you whoever, and just go with it because that'll save your buyer some money. But if you're in Manatee County, the buyer typically picks the escrow agent and pays the owner's policy. So if they don't, they're saying, no, we're not having the seller pay that, that's on the buyer, then you can put Integrity Title down there. Or if for some, it's always the buyer's choice or the seller's choice. Everything's directed by the customer. Sometimes when I say you can put Integrity Title down there, I say that because they may say, we don't know. You're the real estate professional, so we'll just go with whatever it is that you think is best. And then that's our affiliate. They may have another title company that they've had experience with or just prefer. So if they do, then of course, then you'll put that information there. I will tell you, when you finally add this contract to your Ruttenberg files. If it's a contract that you're adding to your listing, you're just going to hit a red button that says add contract. You don't start a new file. However, if you didn't have the listing, you're going to start a buyer's file. And the most important email is going to be that email title company in that file. Make sure you get the title company's email correct, because if you don't, and you get all your documents uploaded and approved, and that pack letter, paid at closing letter, is ready, they're going to email that paid at closing letter to whatever email address you have for that title company. So if it's not right, they'll never get that pack letter. I've had agents go, my file's complete, everything's fine, and the title company doesn't have a copy of the letter. Well, we go look at the email address and they put in the wrong email address. Okay. Oh, good. Karen says she can't wait. Yeah. And also, the other thing you should know is if you're ever at a title company and something happens like that, I used to actually print one out from the file and carry it with me before COVID when I attended every closing, because I had a title company and said, we didn't get your pack letter, and I knew I had one. But you can always get it through your file. So if maybe you're not at closing, but they say, we don't have your pack letter. Well, then just go to your file, pull it off and email it to them. Okay. So that takes care of that. Any questions about the title company or escrow agent? No? Okay. Also, the line underneath on 36 on B, you can actually negotiate it so that your buyer does additional deposits. So if you don't want to put the whole deposit down initially, maybe they want to do something, after the inspection period. They're like, okay, I'll put down, maybe, I don't know, maybe they want to make their offer more competitive. Maybe they're going to do 1% on their initial deposit, but then they're going to do maybe another 1% to let the seller know how serious they are. And they're going to do that after the inspection. So you've got a number of days. It's 10 if we leave it blank after the effective date. We talked about the effective date, but we got some newbies in the class today that I haven't seen. So I know, Karen, I know you're going to know this answer. So you hold off a minute. But who can tell me what determines the effective date of a contract? What are the things that have to happen to this as-is contract for us to go, yep, there's an effective date of this contract? Anybody know?
All parties have to receive the contract and acknowledge receipt of the contract by signature, dating, and an affirmation that from both sides of the table that the effective date is X date.
Okay, that's pretty lengthy there, Kelly. I can tell you were trained at Keller Williams. Yep. Right? Yeah. Yeah. That really covers it. That's like taking the hammer and going, okay. I've been taught that and Karen, this is, I'm sure what you were going to say, because we've done this, that it has to be signed by all parties, initialed by all parties. Yeah, there she goes. I love it. Okay, we'll tell Kelly and Gary why. It has to be signed by all parties, initialed by all parties if there are initials, not like half initials here and there. They have to match. And then it has to be delivered to all parties. Now, Kelly, you were like, it's got to be received and affirmed and yada, yada. But I've been taught that if you just deliver it to the other agent, then the date that it's delivered in their email is the effective date. And she's got her glasses on because there's a Stevie Wonder song that is signed, sealed, delivered, I'm yours. And I was like, signed, initialed, delivered, effective date. So I used to teach kindergarten. So I'm like, because what happens, thank you for that, Karen. Typically what happens is agents forget it has to be delivered. They just think everybody's got to sign it. But the example I give is, let's say I get an offer and my seller accepts all the terms. and he signs it. It's sitting in my DocuSign, and I go off to Tahiti without emailing it back to the selling agent. I don't have it, the clocks haven't started. I don't have an effective date. It starts when I send it back. Okay. And that date is so important because all the time frames go off of that date. Now, when I sent you the email for this class, you probably went, oh my gosh, why did she send me so many attachments? And you don't have to print them all off. I just want you to be familiar what's out there. You can find most of those on the Ruttenberg dashboard, and probably all of them on the Form Simplicity or Transaction Desk. But one of the things I did send you that you won't find is the letter that I put together that I use that keeps me organized, I call it the Congratulations Are in Order letter. And what I do is I just typed it once, and I keep copying and pasting it and changing the terms specific to the new property and parties that are involved. But it basically says, congratulations are in order. Please find attached the fully executed contract for this property, yada, yada, yada. And then I'll say the effective date is, because there's no place to put an effective date in our Ruttenberg files or on the contract, because it's like you got to go hunt the email that delivered that. So I go ahead for a reason, because all I have to do is type congratulations are in order and the first numbers of that transaction, and it pops that letter up anytime I want to write an addendum, because that addendum is going to call for the effective date. So all I have to do is go, oh, what was that? And then I can just, knowing that that's correct, if I have to write addendum 2, I can just go look on addendum 1, but I'm not searching for emails. I also use that letter to let everybody know who's involved. So all the information is there, not the buyer and the seller, but the title company, the lender, the other agent, a home inspector. If he's got something scheduled, I'll put that on there. There's a condo association or a homeowners association. I'll put that there. So just know that that's a letter that I've found helps me organize my business. If you find something that works for you better, great. But I just keep copying and pasting and using that, keeps me organized. So you can actually do an additional deposit. That's kind of where we left off and kind of went on that tangent about the effective date. Now, we didn't talk yet about this purchase, if it's going to be financed or cash. If it's cash, there's a little box you're going to check on the next page that says cash. But typically what I'll do is I'll write the amount and the purchase price, and then in caps I'll write cash, because I want, when I send that offer over, I want them to go, oh, it's a cash offer. I want them to see that right up front. If it's not cash, of course, I don't do that. And then I'll put financing. You're going to express as a dollar amount or percentage of the loan amount. So I typically, so even if you receive the offer is accepted, then you still, yes, that stinks. No, it doesn't stink. Although okay, Karen's brought up something that I'm going to talk about just because it happened. All right. So I'm a night owl. Okay. So I sent the offer over, blah, 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 blah. So she sends it back over to me. I send it off to my customer. They do it. And then like at, 11:57, I send it back over. So yes, my effective date is that earlier date before midnight. And I didn't think anything about it, because whenever I count up those days, I actually count them up from the one that would be like if they signed it today, what would the time frame be, so that I have all the inspection and everything coordinated, so I don't come up short. Well, apparently she thought, that agent's asleep. She won't see it till the morning. So I woke up to a scathing email. How dare you send me back that fully executed contract before midnight? And I was like, she goes, I didn't think you'd send it back today. That just wasn't polite. And I was like, I didn't mean it that way. I mean, I'm working here for my buyer, right? So I don't want another offer to be accepted, like maybe at 6 o'clock in the morning, right? So I want to get that offer taken care of as quickly as possible. I'm working for my customer. She didn't quite get that, but I was like, she probably hasn't been in the business that long. But it was nothing personal. But she thought I was a real smart aleck for sending it like at 11:57 and saying today's our effective date. But I just wanted to get it done. So just when you're calculating timeframes, make sure that if that listing agent is responsive, you're covered on the timeframes you're allowing for inspection and loan approval and all that stuff. That makes sense, Karen? You still got that look on your face. You're like, yeah, because some realtors are night owls. I happen to be one of them. So that'll let you know if you're going to do a deal with me. If you don't want me expediting it till the next day, don't send it to me. Okay. So back to cash or financing. So if it's going to be financing, you can put a percentage amount on line number 39. And then on line, I guess it looks like it's line 41, balance to close, and it really goes to line 42. That number, okay, I've heard a couple of things. My first broker told me, because I was doing the math, I was doing the loan to value and then actually writing a number in for the balance. And he goes, if you got offers and counter offers going back and forth, he goes, just write the word balance there. And then, title company will do the math. Sounded simple to me. So if I know it's 80% loan to value, I'll just put 80% right balance. And then if there's any changes, it's basically just the purchase price or the escrow money, and I don't have to fool with any more initials. But I've also heard from people that are more maybe legal that no, they really like amounts there. So I'm still going to write the word balance until somebody throws it back at me and says you can't do it just because it's easier. You can decide, it's your business what you want to do. But I thought that was simpler, and no one is throwing this back as a disapproved contract or doesn't meet compliance with the word balance. So that's up to you. Any questions on that? Comments? No? Okay. The time for acceptance, this is like your expiration date, like what, I always think of a carton of eggs. When do they expire? Okay, this offer is good until this date. So in the seller's market, sellers didn't care. They were like, they can tell us it expires tomorrow. We'll look at it next week because we got so many offers. So it just depends on who's got the negotiating power. Okay. But there are some buyers. They're like, if you don't have this back to me by a certain time frame, I'm moving on to something else. And if your seller really likes that offer, then they need to know they're taking a risk if they don't respond. You can put the next day. You can put 2 days from the date that you're putting this offer in. One company that early on I saw did, they were more like a home management company. They had their tenants go out and find properties and then bought them and then leased them back to them. So it was kind of a different type of operation, but they did a lot of their own standard things. They would always put on their time for acceptance, they would put 5 p.m. offer date. And it would be like 3 p.m. and they made the offer. And I'm thinking that's 2 hours. But then they would put plus 1 day. So 5 p.m. offer date plus 1 day. So that meant I had to have a response back by 5 p.m. the next day. Okay. You can do whatever it is that you feel best. Sometimes the buyer's like, yeah, I really want to know by tomorrow at 5 o'clock because I'm going out of town and I want to, or they'll say, you know what, they can tell us in 2 days. The only thing that happens, the longer that acceptance offer expiration period is, the more opportunity the seller has to take in other offers for consideration. Okay. But there are times where the seller has logistics issues. Like maybe I had one property where there were six brothers involved, and I had to get 6 signatures through DocuSign, and like 4 of them were responsive, and we were always waiting on 2 of them. So that happens too. Kara, I love Kara's expression. She's like, okay. Any questions on the time of acceptance? No. Okay. Number 4 is the closing date. This is a critical term when I'm saying to the buyers, hey, what price do you want to offer? What's your EMD? I pretty much, know title company. How long do you want them to consider this offer before it expires? And when do you want to close? And typically, if you have financing, you're going to need a minimum of 30 days. Sometimes they like 45. But again, the seller wants typically, maybe, I say typically, nothing's ever really typical, but more often than not, the seller seems to want to close sooner than later. If you've got a property that's vacant and the investor, he wants to get out of there and get his money out and go on to the next thing. Or if someone's moved away, they've got the carrying cost of the property. They want to get out from under it. But there are some times, like I had that condo I was telling you, that was like $1 million in Longboat Key. The seller was going off to an assisted living facility, and he had been very proactive by putting his property on the market, and he didn't want to close until like 60 days. And the buyers were ready to close in 30 because they didn't want to have to rent something for another month. But it was a seller's market, so he got 60 days. And he also got post-closing occupancy for free for 2 weeks after that, which I know it's like we gave them all their terms, and then they came back with a counter of post-closing occupancy. And at that time, I didn't really know what that was or what I'd need to do. So you're always going to learn something. We don't have that kind of market right now, so you're not going to probably find that. But if you do, don't panic. People can help you through it. But the thing about the closing date is it has to be on a day when the banks are open, because your transaction has to be funded. And in order to be funded, the bank has to be open. So that means it can't be on a weekend and it can't be on a federal holiday. So, make sure there's all these federal holidays that are different. We've got Martin Luther King. We've got Veterans Day. We've got Labor Day. We've got Juneteenth. We've got all kinds of different dates. So whenever someone says to me a closing date, I literally look on a calendar that has all the federal holidays declared, and I make sure that the closing date doesn't fall on a weekend or one of those dates. Because otherwise you're going to be writing an addendum changing the closing date. Okay. Any questions on anything on page 1? No? So you're expert. So if I'm your buyer, I'm going to go, okay, make an offer on this property. I use my first and last name only. And you could go fill out page 1 when I tell you I want to pay $250,000. I'm going to put $2,500 down. I want 2 days for the time of acceptance, and I want to close on in 30 days, which is going to be, April the 23rd. So you're going to go look at the calendar and make sure that doesn't fall on a weekday or a holiday. And if it does, you're going to direct me to either before or after that, probably a little bit after, just to give the lender time to close, since I'm going to be financing it. Or maybe I'm going to do cash and I want to close in 2 weeks, right? Okay. So you feel comfortable, you have a buyer and wants to move forward, because that's kind of an exciting thing. They go, yeah, write the offer. Okay. Extension of a closing date. This is good. Last fall, I guess it was it fall? Yeah. I guess when Ian came through, we actually had a lot of force majeure. That's on B. So if you have a hurricane that comes through and the title companies aren't operating, there's a whole force majeure that kicks in. And I believe that's going to be discussed in tomorrow's webinar. So just stay tuned for that. It's good. It works. But had I not been through Ian and I had a closing and I was counseling agents about it. So it's like I got into the inner workings of that, and the way they have it written, it works, but it's just something you don't usually run into. Okay, occupancy. So you're going to see in paragraph 6A that this would be when there's no tenant in place. This is like the property is going to be vacant. There's no tenant, because you can sell a property with a tenant in place renting, and you have to have the lease honored. So whoever buys it would have to allow the tenant to finish out the lease. And I've done that before. Sometimes sellers think they have to wait until the tenant's lease has expired, but you don't. So if it doesn't have a tenant, then you're going to see paragraph A, and it talks about transferring the property and the possession. And then on B, you're going to see where if there is a tenant in place, you're going to have to check B. Okay. And there's some things that happen when there's a tenant in place. You're going to have the lease and the terms and everything, the deposit, security deposit, all that will transfer at closing to the new owners, the buyers from the sellers. Okay, any questions about everything to paragraph 7? No? Okay. 7 is assignability. Sometimes people will want to go into contract and then assign this contract to their company. So I've seen it where they're going to check the second box. They're going to assign but not be released from liability under the contract. There's less risk to the seller on that because you still have liability on the initial buyer. This was a big practice where you're going to sign and be released. That's the first box. When the market was kind of crazy back in the mid 2000s, because people were making money by getting into contract on a property they never intended to buy and then selling that contract to somebody else, and they'd make a little money doing that. But that really puts the seller at risk, because if I go in and I get into contract and I'm a cash buyer and I have proof of funds and then I assign it to somebody and I'm released from liability, well, now that seller has to deal with that new buyer. And who knows if they're qualified. But I've assigned it and I'm done. So that box about being released from further liability is never a good one. If you're the seller, you may have a buyer that wants to do that, but then I'd be going, why do you want to do that? The assigned but not be released. I've told you that I've seen people do that with companies. I had an agent that presented an offer like that on a listing I had. And I said, why are they doing that? And she said, oh no, that's not the buyer. That's from me. I always just have that marked in case they want to assign it to the company. And I said, well, I would prefer, after talking to my seller, of course, because it's always directed, but you're guiding them. After talking to my seller, the seller would prefer that you have it, that the contract is not assignable. So that would be, may not assign this contract, which is, if no box is checked, that's the default. And she said, oh yeah, we can change that. That was just something that I always throw in there. Okay. Because I'm always looking out for whatever customer, whether it's the seller or the buyer, whoever I'm representing. Okay, so that's the assignability. Any questions on that? Okay. Thanks. Now I know why to send it in, and then I won't wait until 9 a.m. to give my buyer an extra day because it would cost. Yeah. Karen's like, yeah, might as well get it in and stitch it up. And then send that congratulations are in order right away, so everybody's got a copy of it and they can get going on it, right? And then maybe some people try to deal without a real estate license. Yeah, I mean, I guess. I mean, if I don't have a license and I'm having you get me in a contract and then we're going to assign it to somebody else. Yeah, things are written in contracts because they've had issues. If they're not issues, they don't get addressed. That's just like this condo rider revision. Before that condo collapsed and killed people, they're not addressing the maintenance. But now that people have died, they're going to put something in writing to make it the sellers accountable, or the condo association accountable, for at least disclosing the buyer the shape of the condo. Okay, let's go to financing if there aren't any questions then on 88. So this is the box. If it's a cash transaction, you're going to check for your cash buyer. And that's great for the seller because that means one less contingency, right? Not everybody has cash though. So if they're going to do mortgage loan financing, you're going to check box 89. And you can see the contract is contingent. And then it says within so many days after the effective date, which is the loan approval period. I did a lot of real estate, not even really knowing what this was, but it hadn't been a problem to me, so I didn't address it. As I got more informed and saw what was going on in the brokerage with the agents and got counseled. I was like, oh my gosh, that is an important time period. So I want to stress that to you, that loan approval period is the period that the buyer has to get loan approval, get their clear to close, okay, without having their escrow money deposit at risk of losing it. So they can get a loan denial letter for if it's left blank for 30 days and, okay, we can't do this. We're taking our escrow money deposit and we're moving on. And the poor seller has had his property off market for 30 days, losing market time with no compensation. That's the risk the seller takes by going to contract like that. You can, like I said, everything's negotiable. You can, in additional terms, make some part or all of the escrow money deposit non-refundable. This could happen, let's say we have a 30-day loan approval period and you've decided to ask the seller for a 2-week extension, okay? And guess I'm going to share it with you this way. Okay. Don't be the agent if you're representing the buyer that extends a closing date by using an addendum that just says the closing date is or has been extended to, and you have the new date if it's financing, because you have not extended the loan approval period if you just do it that way. And if it turns out that the buyer's loan is denied after that loan approval period before they close, then they're going to lose their deposit. And you wouldn't have wanted them to do that. You also might have a listing agent that says, you know what, I know it says 30 days left, if left blank, but my seller doesn't want to have his property out for 30 days. They should be able to get a loan approval in 20. So they may actually put 20 days there. And you're going to need to keep track of that because on the 21st day, your buyer's escrow money would be in jeopardy. Okay. Also, there's another part of this contract, we'll get there. But once you do have loan approval, you need to put in writing to the seller that the buyer has received loan approval. Because if you don't, there's a provision, and this would be happening in the seller's market, where the seller can kick the buyer out if they haven't heard anything and take another offer. And then your buyer's going to be really upset with you. I've never seen that happen, but that was one of the changes that they put into this contract. So just getting back to basics, the contract is contingent upon within so many days. Usually people leave it blank for 30 and then you count out the loan approval period. And I put that on that congratulations letter that the loan approval period ends, and I put the date so I can keep an idea, when we've got to have loan approval period. Most of the time it ends like maybe a few days before closing or right on closing. Every once in a while, if you're not counting the days right with the short closing period, it might go beyond closing. So then it's never going to, the escrow money never be in jeopardy. But just count those days, see where you land. And you're going to see that it's going to be a certain type of loan. Is it going to be conventional, FHA, VA, or other? So if you've got a conventional loan, you'll want to check that. If your buyer's going VA or FHA, you're going to want to check that. And then you're going to need the writer, the FHA or VA addendum. And that's on the additional terms, there's a place to check that box to attach that addendum. And that addendum, you need to read it and see what is happening with those VA and FHA conditions. And that's something we can get into after, if we have time after this, or maybe even just a class on the writers. You are going to have another layer of inspection because they'll send out a VA or an FHA inspector to look at things that a home inspector isn't going to look at. And one of my favorite stories is my mom's property in Weatherstone after she'd passed was one of those nice, homes, Charles Rutenberg homes that had an outdoor kitchen. She never updated it. The outdoor kitchen was wood. The doors had rotted. The buyer didn't care because they were going to take the kitchen out, But when the VA inspector came in, he was like, oh, we can't have wood rot. So I had to remove the door cabinets that had wood rot, go to Home Depot, get a piece of plywood that was big enough to cover that enclosure with the doors removed, paint it the color of the cabinets, nail it to the cabinets, and then it passed inspection. So you might find things that really aren't practical, but they have to follow those guidelines. Okay. Any other question about the financing or anything on page 2? Right. Here's where I want to share with you about you need to let the seller know buyer has approval. And I asked the question, if the lender tells the other agent, does that count? And the answer was no. According to this contract, you have to do it. So if you look at, all right, look at line 123 on page 3. Do you see where about the end of it? It says seller may elect to terminate this contract by delivering written notice of termination to buyer within 3 days after expiration of the loan approval period, and provided buyer is not in default of any other terms, the escrow money would be returned to the buyer. But do you see where it says if buyer, okay, let's go back to line 120. If buyer fails to timely deliver any written notice provided about the financing, about to seller prior expiration of the loan approval period, then the buyer shall proceed forward with this contract as though it had been checked. But it says seller may elect to terminate. So the buyer can move forward, but the seller could terminate it. Okay, so good practice is if you get a clear to close and you've got the approval, just do a quick email to the other agent so you don't ever have a seller getting out of that loophole. I've never seen it happen, but I want you to be aware of it. Okay, paragraph 9 on lines 140 and 154, where it says other and a blank. I want you to look every single time you get an offer at those two different spaces, because that's where the other agent might put something, if you don't look there, that will obligate your customer to something they don't want to do. And they won't be looking at that spot, and you won't be looking at that spot. And the next thing you know, the other party will be going, oh, but per the contract, your customer's obligated to do this. So these talk about the closing costs that are going to be paid by the seller and to be paid by the buyer. And some of it's conditional, like who's picking the title company, the escrow agent, and who's paying the owner's policy. So, because that changes. The owner's policy is going to be paid by the seller. If the seller's picking and payment, it's going to be paid by the buyer if the buyer's picking and paying. But this is where they might say, oh, to be paid by seller. And they may put, some other amount in there. Basically, if you're making the offer, look where the buyer is. What's the buyer, they're obligating the buyer to anything else. Sometimes, let's say if you're the buyer, you may see the listing. No, I guess it's, let's say you're the seller. You may see the other agent put their brokerage, like a transaction fee or something there to the buyer. They might put, $350 to Keller Williams or something like that. That's really not where it belongs, but I've seen that happen. But just make sure that that's still blank. And if it's not blank, you understand what it is. And if it doesn't apply to your customer, fine. But if it does, you need to make sure that the customer, that's something they want to do. You just don't want any surprises. Okay, moving on to page 4. Oh, here's the famous pick and pay. And it says check 1. So I'll tell you from a compliance standpoint, if a document says check 1, you need to check 1. There are many times where I was reviewing these as-is contracts and this whole section was left blank. And that's a big term of the contract. Who's going to pick the escrow, the closing agent, and who's going to pay for the owner's policy and charges. So if the seller's going to do it, make sure you check that first box. If the buyer's going to do it, make sure you check the second box. We're not in Miami-Dade, Broward, so you don't have to ever worry about the third box unless you relocate to the other part of the state. Okay? Any questions on that? If you don't check those boxes, you're going to get a note from the compliance department. It's going to say, please provide an addendum indicating who's going to designate the closing agent and pay for the owner's policy and charges. So that's just more work for you to do. So just make sure you get it done the first time. Then 181 talks about D, the survey, at least 5 days prior to closing, buyer at their expense can have the property surveyed. And then it says here, if the seller has a survey covering the real property, a copy to be furnished to buyer and closing agent within 5 days after effective date. So if seller has a survey, that'd be a good time to furnish it. Home warranty. This is something that in the seller's market wasn't really addressed. You didn't really find buyers asking sellers to pay for home warranties. And usually buyers don't get home warranties. And when they're purchasing real estate, they'll think, oh, I'll do that after closing. And so there were a lot of NAs that were checked. I mentioned yesterday when I have a customer who's buying a property that's more than $250,000, my personal business practice is for their closing gift, I give them as a gift a home warranty from Global Home USA. And what I do to have that happen is I put that the buyer is going to pay for it. And then in additional terms, I write something that Charles Ruttenberg Realty will reimburse the buyer in the amount of whatever that amount is for the home warranty reimbursement. And then that gets taken off before closing with a credit at closing and isn't added to my 1099 income. So you got a happy buyer and I don't have as much to pay in tax. It's a little bit expensive, but if it's over $250,000, there's enough margin in there for me and my commission to provide that. So you can do whatever you want. And I always ask the buyers, do you want the seller to pay for a home warranty? Do you want to pay for a home warranty if it's under $250,000? If it's over I said, listen, I'm gonna provide that for you as a closing gift. And I've never had one be unhappy about that. Special assessments. This is an F. A lot of agents starting out think that the special assessment has to do with the condo assessments or homeowner assessments. It has nothing to do with those two things. Nothing. The condo assessment and the homeowner assessments are handled in the condo rider and the homeowner disclosure. This special assessment is about a municipality doing something in the city for the property. So like if it says imposed by a public body. So see, it does not include a condominium or homeowner. So this would be, maybe there's an assessment because the city's coming in and redoing some streets or some piping or something like that. So if there is an assessment, then you've got boxes. Seller's going to pay the installments prior, buyer after, or seller's going to pay them all. If neither box is checked, then the default is A, where the seller is going to pay prior to closing and buyer afterwards. So just be aware of that. I usually see things either not checked or box A checked. You just need to know if the property's got an assessment on it or not. I haven't dealt with one that had one, but I'm sure there have been that do. Okay, so that takes care of a lot. The only other real term we've got is the home inspection, but they're starting in with the disclosures before we get to that term. So these disclosures are just things that by law are being disclosed to the buyer about just different things, rate on gas, permits, this one's a good one. On B, permits disclosure. Let me just look at something here. Because I found there's a lot of unpermitted work, and it's not been disclosed by the seller. And that unpermitted work travels with the property. So once the seller sells it, they're no longer at risk, but the buyer that buys it is. So if you're looking at line 209, permits disclosure, it says, except as may have been disclosed by seller to buyer in a written disclosure, seller does not know of any improvement made to the property which were made without required permits or made pursuant to permits which have not been properly closed. So, I'll have that one seller I told you was trying to put it in somebody else's name, and he kind of went away. When I walked in, I could just tell he had converted the whole garage. It was like a Florida Cracker House. He converted it into a master suite. I said, has this work been permitted? He goes, no. Okay. So I'm like, okay, well, you probably want to disclose that. I mean, if the buyer buys it, then he's buying it aware that he might have an issue down the road, because the code enforcement might come in and tell him, oh, you got to tear this out, or, oh, you got to pay X number of fines to bring this up to code, or he may fly under the radar and not have any issues, but it's a risk he's going to take. Okay. So anyway, this is where the seller's saying, yep, I've disclosed all the unpermitted work that's there. Okay, when we come down to page 5 on E, you see where it says energy brochure? I sent that to you. Okay, I practiced a long time not even knowing about an energy brochure. I don't see many uploaded to the files, but this is with this, the buyer acknowledges receipt of the Florida Energy Efficiency Rating Information brochure. So the buyer's going, yeah, I got that. How many agents really send that to the buyer? I know, Gary, this is keeping you up. Me too. I'm trying to make it as interesting as possible. But I sent that energy brochure to you. So you might put it in your little stockpile of documents that, when you send the offer over for the buyer to sign. Oh, wait a minute. Okay. Let me just finish this and I'll look in the comments. You can send that over, like with maybe the CRR buyer's disclosure and the wire fraud, things that aren't really part of the actual paperwork of the transaction, but have to be in your file, just so the buyer will have had it. Okay, Kelly says, quick question, and Carrie says, I do, and I do for people I work with. Okay, thank you, sweetie. Okay, Kelly, what's your question? And it doesn't have to be quick.
Okay. In regards to unpermitted work, and especially like, I don't know, roofing or whatever the case may be. Now, the last I heard is that insurance companies will view unpermitted work as it never happened. They'll make them actually redo the work and have it permitted. Is that still the case to your understanding?
I don't know. I would probably talk to Bernardo Piccolo. He's our affiliate insurance person, and he's very good, knowledgeable. He actually has classes at Charles Rutenberg. But my first thought would be I'd be calling Bernardo and he's also a realtor, so he has a realtor perspective. But I'd call him and say, Bernardo, I've got this property. We're trying to get it insured because you're going to have insurance if you have a mortgage loan. And, I have suspect of, X, Y, and Z with the roof or the unpermitted work or whatever it is. And then he would specifically look at that property and then advise me what the circumstances and the risk could be for that specific property. That makes sense. So I would be working very carefully, closely with the insurance expert on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if that helps, but I get really leery with unpermitted work because I'm like, you might not have any problem, but heaven help the person, they get a knock at the door. They just spent their last penny to get this house. And I'm thinking of the sweet little family that has the wife's mom living with them, and they have a son, and they only had like $250,000 to spend before the prices really went crazy. And of course, that wouldn't buy anything in Pinellas County for a single family home with enough space for them. So we were looking up in Newport Richey, Pasco County, and we were just finding all kinds of unpermitted work. And I was like saying to them, listen, I know someone's going to buy this house, but here's the risk that you may inherit if you buy this. I know this is like perfect for your mom-in-law right now, but it's not permitted. So if somebody knocks at your door and says, you got to, pay money you don't have or tear it down, what are you going to do? So just, I guess you have to know your customer's tolerance for that kind of risk. And then they've got to decide if they want to take that on or not. And then as far as insuring it, yeah, I'd be talking to my insurance guy. Okay, so we're going back to page 5, and we've got line 229 with the energy brochure. So that's just something, that this says the buyer has seen it. So you might want to send it to them. Letter F, lead-based paint. Anything that is constructed prior to 1978 requires a lead-based paint disclosure, which is also an addendum that the listing agent should have prepared for you, that should be uploaded to the little paperclip icon on the MLS. If it's a homeowners association, look in this big print. Buyers should not execute this contract until the buyer has received and read all the homeowners association community disclosure, if applicable. So if there's a homeowners disclosure that's attached to that listing, make sure you've sent that over to the buyer, maybe even before they execute this document, because they're saying that, they shouldn't execute it until they've read it. It doesn't really have any teeth in it, but it's kind of a warning to them. All right. Also, property tax disclosure, they say, oh, what's property taxes? Well, guess what? With the way the market went, the prices went up and the rates change on taxes. A lot of times the taxes were not what they were prior to the sales. So they have an estimated tax calculator. I know for sure on the Pinellas County website, you can contact the tax appraiser's office if you want to get something even more specific. Then I is that FIRPTA, which is the foreign seller. So that does deal with that language. You can see where it says see standard V for further information. And then also, if you go to page 11, we can just go there now. Page 11, addenda and additional terms. You're going to see boxes. Just know that whatever box is checked on your contract, if you upload it to the files compliance system, if you don't upload, let's check one because whatever, and a lot of times I had agents that maybe the property had a condo association, but they put a homeowners association. So they checked the homeowners association. So they ended up uploading a condo writer, the homeowners association, and they got, no, sorry, it's not a condo writer. And then they had the condo writer put in, or whatever was checked was put in, the homeowners. They're like, well, there's no homeowners association attached to it. So then you'd have to write an addendum saying that the property didn't have a homeowners association. So my point to you is, whenever you're checking these boxes, make sure the boxes that you check are accurate to the property. Otherwise, you're going to be undoing what you check with an addendum, or you're going to be required to upload that document. And the reason I pulled you over here to look at this is I wanted to show you the FIRPTA disclosure. And, oh, why am I not seeing it? Okay, I know that, okay, there isn't one for this. So what I would do is I would check other and then write FIRPTA in, FIRPTA, and I'd go grab it off of Form Simplicity. I was thinking it was on there. There, what someone had said that it was handled in the contract. I may have to ask another broker about that, because I've always in practice been told I have to have that FIRPTA addendum attached. But obviously there's not a NAS's FIRPTA. There would be one upload. Very interesting. You can always learn something. I would go ahead and use the FIRPTA addendum until you're instructed otherwise, because I've used it and haven't gotten into any trouble.
But what about line 242? Is that the same as the FIRPTA addenda, or is it more detailed?
Well, it's got more information in there because this just says buyer and seller advised to seek legal counsel, right? And it talks about what defines a foreign seller, but the FERPTA addendum has more language to it. And I've been able, it doesn't have a line reference like I was talking with the crisp versus the as is. So I've always attached it and it's always been accepted. So I would counsel you, if you get a foreign seller with this explanation I'm giving you, I'm not satisfied with it. So either check with the broker at the office or go take a FERPTA class at Pro. You can just go by my practice that I've done it and it's worked, that you grab the FERPTA crisp and use that. I know Michael Heath, the integrity title attorney, he has a great class that I don't know if they're doing it again. I think it's called, they are doing it. I think that's the one at Muggs. It's called Contracts and Cocktails. Go to that because I'm holding the paper I got at his class and he goes over the as-is contract just like I'm going over with you now. But he does talk a lot about FERPTA and he's very knowledgeable about that. I'm holding a paper that talks more about that. It says you have to, withhold 15% unless you get a non-foreign certificate, which is the intent to reside. And there's some other things about it. So that's more detailed. I'm not going to take the time just because you're going to have less, I don't know, unless you have a customer niche where you're dealing with a lot of sellers who are foreign, you won't run into it too much. But when you do, that's when you need to know it. All right, the seller's disclosure on J, the seller knows of no facts materially affecting the value of the real property, which are not ready at the observer. This basically says he's not hiding anything. I had an agent in the class the other day that said, well, my seller knows there's been a sinkhole and the sinkhole's been remediated, but he doesn't want me to say anything about it. And he doesn't want to say anything about it. So if you read this, that goes against that, right? So the seller needs to disclose whatever is not readily observable, or he can set himself up for a big lawsuit. And if the buyer gets in that circumstance, they're going to get mad at the seller and they're going to get mad at you and they're going to get mad at Charles Ruttenberg. So you'll have a lawsuit on everybody. So you want to avoid that at all costs. Okay. Let's see. Property maintenance. This is where the seller can't just go, oh, great, I'm under contract. Now I don't have to take care of the lawn or the pool. No, it says in this 257 line, seller shall maintain the property, not limited to lawn, shrubbery, pool, in the condition existing as of the effective date, which is a date everybody signed, sealed, delivered on yours. It's the contract date, the effective date when it was delivered. Okay, property inspection. This is the last term that you're going to have to get from your buyer. Okay, do you want an inspection? Usually an inspection is a good idea. In the seller's market, they didn't do them as much. And then you're going to, as the buyer's agent, always going to be in contact with the inspector. I usually call mine up and say, hey, look, this offer looks like it's going to go to contract. What's your soonest availability? And then I kind of plan the effective date off of that. Although I mentioned yesterday, there's other due diligence that goes on besides the inspection, the property inspection. But that's where you're going to put that inspection period. And just know that that's a date that goes, how can I put it? The 2 dates that you don't count, like weekends and skip and all that. There's only 2. And that's the date, that's your effective date. It can be delivered on a Sunday. The contract, you can go to contract anytime. The time of acceptance, it can be anytime. It could be anytime. But the inspection period, if it falls on a Saturday, then you're going to be counting till Sunday, Monday, when the inspection period ends. And if Monday happens to be Labor Day, you're going to go to Tuesday. Okay, so the only two dates that aren't like that, and maybe that's the easiest way to remember it, is the effective date and the time of acceptance. All the other dates, you're going to move forward to the next business day. So that's loan approval period, inspection date, escrow money deposit. Okay. All right, so you're going to have the inspection. With the inspection, I usually let the listing agent know as soon as I know when the inspection is scheduled, just as courtesy. Make sure we have access to the property. Make sure that the utilities and water will be turned on. Sometimes sellers in the little condos I sell in, they turn the water when they leave. So make sure you have the utilities on, because your inspector won't turn them on, especially the water. He won't want the liability. And you don't want the liability, because what if you turn the water on and the big leak starts? Yeah. I have had a seller tell me, his listing agent, I'm not there. I don't have anybody, to do this. So I said, okay, write me an email giving me permission to turn the water on for you. And that's all I did. If you really want to go an extra step, you could get a hold harmless sign. That's where that comes into play. Okay, then the walkthrough, inspection, reinspection. This is where it states, this is when you're supposed to do the walkthrough. Not like that agent that did the walkthrough on a Tuesday, closed on a Friday, and the buyers opened up to an exploded water heater with water in their garage. When did that happen? She was trying to be proactive. No, you do it the day before closing or the day of. And the buyer or the buyer's representative may perform walkthrough. I told you yesterday, don't you be that representative, even if they have to have a friend or a family member do it. If they don't have that, they're not in the area, you can have them check the inspection saying that they elected not to do an inspection, and just as a courtesy, go in there with your FaceTime and walk through and tell them what you see, but you don't want them to hold you to it. Okay. Anything on 5 or 6? No. Okay. There's something on. I guess I'll go into it. We're kind of running out of time, but this is something you should know is here on 342. If you ever have a listing broker receive part of your buyer's escrow money deposit, on 342, it says the portion of the deposit, if any, paid to the listing broker upon default by buyer shall be split equally between the listing broker and the cooperating broker, provided, however, cooperating broker's share will not be greater than the commission amount listing broker had agreed to pay cooperating broker. So there's ever an EMD that goes back to that listing agent from your buyer, you can have your hand out to that broker for half of it. I didn't know that that was written in like that, but that's something you might want to know. And that speaks to if the buyer defaults or the seller defaults. We had a lot of sellers that would say in the height of the market, oh, I want to sell my property, and they get it under contract, and then they go look for where they're going to move to, and they couldn't afford the next property, and they'd say, oh, I really didn't want to be selling my property, I want out. If you read this, seller default, if for any reason other than the failure of seller to make seller's title marketable after reasonable diligent effort, seller fails, neglects, or refuses to perform seller's obligation of this contract, buyer may elect to receive return of buyer's deposit without thereby waiving any action for damages resulting from seller's breach, and so they get their money back, and pursuant to paragraph 16 may seek to recover such damages or seek specific performance. So they can go sue that seller. So once the seller was made aware of this paragraph, they went, oh, I guess I have to sell my property, okay, because they didn't want to have a lawsuit. Okay. The standards for real estate transactions starts on paragraph 18. So like in your spare time, read through A, read through B. B's talking about the survey. You've got all these different things, lease information on D, liens. One I want to pull your attention to is F, time. That's where you're talking about counting days. So if you really want to know how to count things up, this is where it is located in the contract. Calendar days based on where the property is located. So that's a good thing, because I had a buyer and I had a seller in California, and they were buying a property in Pinellas County, and they were asking me what time should they use. Well, based on the contract, it says where the property's located. So even though they were in California, the days counted in Eastern Standard Time, since it's Pinellas. So it says, other than time for acceptance and effective date. So those are your two exceptions. Okay. Any time periods provided for dates specified in this contract, whether yada, 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 shall end or occur on a Saturday, a Sunday, national, on a day is observed because it fell. Okay. So if they're saying Saturday, Sunday, or holiday, then it says shall extend to the next calendar day, which is not a Saturday, Sunday, national legal public holiday, or a day on which a national legal holiday is observed. So that's where you get that. So if you remember, I can go to contract anytime, I can have my offer expire anytime, but everything else I have to count to the next business day. That'll help keep that organized for you. Standard G was what we were reading during Hurricane Ian about force majeure, and I'll address that more tomorrow. I'm so glad we're doing that webinar tomorrow, because after looking at the contract like this, ask questions tomorrow. Okay. Pretty much going to go on to, okay, there's on V, there's more FERPTA for you FERPTA fans. FERPTA tax withholding. If a seller is a foreign person, then that's where it says it's going to withhold up to 15% of the amount. You know, Karen, I think you might be onto something. We may not need that FERPTA addendum. Wasn't that you that brought that up, or was that Carrie? I don't remember. FERPTA is in the as-is contract. They changed it.
It was
Carrie.
Carrie.
It was Carrie. Way to go, Carrie. You taught me something. Thanks, sister. Okay. So I'll bring that up to the broker and go, hey, maybe I've been writing those FERPTA addendums and don't need to. Okay. Thank you, Carrie. All right. So, and that's another thing. Just like the condo rider revisions, just like this was revised a little while ago, you're going to learn it, and then you got to stay open to changes, because things are going to be, look at her. I like that upside down. You're going to, you stay on the cutting edge. All right. If we go over to page 11, you're going to see all those boxes I talked about. There's the condo rider, which we're going to talk about in depth tomorrow because it's been revised. The homeowners association. Most properties have one or the other. Every once in a while, you have a property that has both. Seller financing, we don't see too much of that in these days and times. Mortgage assumptions. When my mom was doing real estate, I would always hear her go, is that loan assumable? But she smoked her, Bel Air cigarette, and drank her scotch and was the old school broker. Don't hear that so much anymore about assumable mortgages. FHA, VA financing, you might have that. Appraisal contingency, you might have that. We didn't have it so much in the seller's market because they were all going, oh, if there's a gap, don't worry, my buyer's got the cash to cover it, and was used language like that. But if you, like that little family I was telling you about that was in Pasco County that only had $250,000, we actually put an appraisal contingency in there because it had to appraise at what they were paying because they didn't have any extra money to bring to closing. So that's just another contingency, but it protected them. And you might use that sometimes when the buyer is putting a large amount of the money down. Maybe they're only financing 50%. So let's say it doesn't appraise out, but the bank goes, well, the buyer has 50% of the skin in the game, so our risk is less. So even though it didn't appraise out, we'll go ahead and give the loan. And if they don't have the money to bring to cover the appraisal gap, then they won't be able to close. They have no loan denial. They're in trouble. So you might want to have an appraisal contingency to say it has to appraise at a certain amount that they're comfortable with. Short sales, I haven't ever done one because I got into real estate in 2014, and that was after big short sale fiasco in the late 2000s. Let's see, defective drywall. We haven't had that too much. I remember that being kind of in the 90s from my mother's remarks. Lead-based paint you'll have construction prior to 78. Someone goes, well, what happens if it's in 1978? And another broker said, then you don't need it. But they may have some paint in the garage. So, I don't know. I would just, if it's 78, I'd probably attach one too, but it's up to you. Housing for older persons, that's 55 or 62 plus. So make sure if that community falls under those categories that the listing agents uploaded that one. I've never used a rezoning or a lease purchase lease option. I've used the pre and post closing occupancy. I would not advise it. There's a lot of risk involved to the parties if there's damages when the buyers move something in before closing, or if the seller stays after the closing, but sometimes it just can't be avoided. And so I've done it. I've written hold harmless, that kind of thing. Another one you might have, because it's not so much of a seller's market, is the sale of the buyer's property. Sometimes they will say, I have to sell my property before I can move on. And that's a contingency that they can get their escrow money out if it doesn't close. And that's a whole, you just look at that addendum. It's pretty self-explanatory. I haven't used a kick-out clause. Seller's attorney approval, or the buyer's attorney approval. Sometimes the seller or the buyer has attorney and they have to get approval based on designing. So you might have that addendum. Licensee property interest. Yes, if you're selling or buying your own property, you need to have that filled out, and you are a principal. So your errors and omissions will go from $40 to $100. So if you're on the program where you get charged $290 for the transaction, because it's $250 for the transaction fee and $40 for the errors and omissions, it will actually go to $350. Now, if you are going to fill that out because let's say the buyer is your brother, you want to disclose that, but you're not a principal, so your errors and omissions will still stay at 40%. You can just say you don't have financial interest in the property when you fill it out, but you can just say, buyer or seller is my brother or mother, or whatever the relationship is. Okay, PACE disclosure. PACE has to do with a loan that is tied to municipality, and it usually deals with solar panels, okay? Just to be aware of that. So if you have a seller that says, I have solar panels, great. You want to know if they have a loan for those solar panels, if it's a municipal loan, and because that conveys with the property. Okay, let me see. We are at 31. We went through this. We went through the boxes. Let's see. Is there any questions that you all have on this as is that didn't address? Oh, let me just say this. Make sure that when you submit an offer that your buyer has initialed every bottom of the page and signed and dated the last page. Also, the last page is not a place for any kind of commissions. This agreement is between the buyer and the seller, not the seller and a brokerage giving listing commissions or cooperating commissions. So it doesn't belong here. It's not enforceable because the seller and the buyer aren't agreeing about commissions. So the cooperating sales associate, listing sales associate, and their broker, that's for informational purposes only. And in additional terms on the top of page 12, if there's anything else that needs to be addressed, like maybe, the escrow money deposit, I want to tell you anything under $10,000, if it's in dispute, will get eaten up by arbitration fees and attorneys. So hopefully, you think it was Jim? Oh, that told you about it? Yeah. Okay, Carrie. Just know it'll get eaten up. So make sure that you guard it. If it's in dispute, sometimes it's better to maybe talk the customers both to go in half so that at least somebody gets something. But let's say, I'll just tell you, if you're going to extend a closing date and you're the buyer's agent, you're going to want to extend the closing date and the financing loan approval period. Because if you extend the closing date and get out of that loan approval period, and for some reason they don't close, your buyer's going to lose your escrow money deposit. And there is something called an extension addendum that's on transaction desk that has some boxes. And I believe I sent that to you as an attachment. So don't be one of those agents from the buyer that just says the contract date is extended too, because you may put your buyer's escrow money in jeopardy. Okay. And with that, I had one seller who had it with a buyer who kept extending, and he finally said, we'll extend the contract another week, but all of the escrow, we're going to require another $1,000 in escrow money deposit, and that plus the original deposit are all non-refundable in case you don't close. Because he was like, I'm tired of having this off market. And the buyer went ahead and agreed to it because he really felt like he was going to close. So he didn't have anything to lose, but he assumed the risk of not closing. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a long 2-hour class just talking about a form. But this contract is like, the basic element of what you're doing in your business. And the more you are familiar with it and know it and feel comfortable, the better agent you're going to be for your buyer as you write the offer, or for your seller as you receive an offer and can help them to sort out the best offer for their goals. Okay. Do you guys have any other questions? Or I hope this was informative. I hope it didn't bore you. I hope it wasn't, So when seller is countering an offer, he said you are supposed to check the box on the last page. I never knew that. Oh, yeah. I've never done that. As a matter of fact, I don't know if I sent this to you. I have it here. But we basically just gone back and forth countering, not checking the box. But there is on line 610, seller counters buyer's offer. There's also another page instead of actually countering on the contract that says counter offer. You can't see it, but it's like a whole page, and you actually write the terms there. And all the documents that I have done in compliance for about 4 years off and on, I've only seen one person use a counter offer page. Everybody strikes it out on the contract. And I heard John Barcel's an appraiser. He says the appraiser actually likes to see the back and forth on the contract. So not having clean contract. He likes to see, what did the buyer think it was? What did the seller think it was? What did they end up meeting on the lines? So honestly, Carrie, I'm not going to be checking that box. I just haven't. I don't know many people that do, but you could, but then I'm like, well, that's something new. So does that would have to be another place where everybody initials. And if they're countering, it's pretty obvious they countered. I think I would probably check that box if I were just going to use the counter offer sheet that I told you about, because then they'd have to do it, and that would indicate that there was a counter offer somewhere. Real estate is an art. So it's not necessarily a science. You're dealing with people, you're dealing with negotiating, and you're usually dealing with one of the person's most valuable assets. So there could be emotions, life changes, things like that. So you're going to wear a lot of hats as you take these buyers out and go shopping with them and try to help them find a place. And right now, as you know, the inventory is very low, so there's not as many choices, but the prices are still high because there aren't as many choices, and the interest rates are higher. So the buyer pool has reduced, the inventory has reduced, and there are still going to be people that need to buy and sell real estate. So, you can just get in the thick of that. So I'm still busy. and most of my business is referrals. People know that I do real estate, so they're calling me. So if I get free after I get rested, I'm going to go take some more classes, because there's no way, even as a broker, even if it's a training broker, that you can know everything about everything in real estate. I think there's only been one broker I've met, and every time I ask him a question, I would just see the file open and he would have the information for you. But I think he has a gift. So, oh, thank you, Carrie. Thanks for your encouragement. I'm glad you learned something, and I thank you for sharing that with me about FERPTA today. So that'll be a question tomorrow, because they're going to talk about FERPTA. So maybe we can find out, what they're going to say on the questions for the Florida Legal Hotline. And if they don't answer it, I guess that's who we can call, or I can call. Okay. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Kelly. It's a pleasure having you. Gary, it's a pleasure having you as well. Karen, always a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you in the morning.
See you in the morning.
Yeah, get a good night's rest, and we'll see you there.
All right.
All right. Have a good rest of your evening, everybody.
You too. Thanks. All right. Bye.
Bye.